Hey folks, this is Kalani. We have some huge class changes coming with the next weekly reset, including massive buffs for the classes not doing so well, and some large nerfs for the classes that are currently dominating the charts. The Blackrock Depths raid has been nerfed quite considerably, we'll soon find out what the next patches have in store for us, and there's also a $90 store mount that broke the WoW token system for a couple of days. There is a lot to talk about this week, so let's break it all down in this week's WoW news video. Now before we jump in, be sure to hit up that like button and subscribe so you never miss another video. Let's kick things off with the first round of class balance changes in patch 11.05. We have a whole bunch of buffs and nerfs to go through, starting with the Death Knights. Blood will be seeing quite a few buffs as we head into next week. Blood Boil damage is up 15%, Heart Strike damage has been increased by 20%, Blood Plague damage is up 10%, and Death Strike damage is getting a 20% buff. So some big damage buffs for some of their most used abilities. The Sand Lane hero talent tree will also be seeing some quick buffs. Vampiric Strike proc chance has been increased, Essence of the Blood Queen duration was increased by 5 seconds, and Gift in the Sand Lane now increases the effectiveness of Essence of the Blood Queen by 200%, up from 150. Moving on, Balance and Restoration Druids are getting even more buffs. For Balance, Celestial Alignment and Incarnation will now reset at the end of raid encounters, making your setup for each boss attempt much easier. Starfall damage has been increased by 6%, Star Surge damage is getting an 8% buff, Starfire damage is being buffed up by 5%, and Wrath damage is up 10%. Shooting Stars and Crashing Stars damage have been increased by 20%, Sunseeker Mushrooms will grow 12% less often, Touch of the Cosmos chance to proc was increased to 15 and 22%, Power of Goldrin's damage was increased by 25%, Rattle the Stars did see a slight nerf down to 8%, and then New Moon and Half Moon damage were also reduced by 5%. So a lot of buffs to various abilities with a handful of small nerfs there at the end. For Restoration Druids, Call of the Elder Druid's duration was increased to 15 seconds, up from 10, and then Dream of Cenarius now causes Wrath and Shred to transfer 100% of their damage done into healing, up from 50%, and Starfire and Swipe will transfer 50% of their damage into healing, up from 33%. So you'll have a few more options for dealing damage and healing at the same time. Moving on, we come to the Hunters. Beast Mastery has been causing quite a few issues since the patch went live. Most of the bugs have been addressed, but there are some adjustments coming through for Beast Mastery's damage output as well. Dark Ranger's Bleak Powder will no longer damage its primary target. Pack Leader Frenzied Tear proc chance was reduced down to 10% from 20%. Pack Leader Vicious Hunt damage has been reduced by 10%. Barbed Shot damage will see a 25% nerf, but then Stomp damage has been increased by 50%, and multi-shot damage has been increased by another 100%, so hopefully that will actually do at least a bit of damage now. Explosive Venom now procs at 3 stacks down from 5, and will appropriately apply Serpent Sting to enemies. Marksmanship made the list this week too. Dark Ranger's Black Arrow damage has been reduced by 10%, Bleak Powder damage has been increased by 25%, Shadow Surge damage will see a 25% buff as well, and then Sentinel's Symphonic Arsenal damage has been increased by 15%. So it's only hero talent adjustments, I'm afraid, nothing too exciting for Marksmanship this week. Up next we have the Monks with some quick changes for Mistweaver specifically. They're going to see a 6% buff to all of their healing across the board, so that'll give them a general bump and help them compete with the other healers, but then Awakened Jadefire was buffed up to 110%, Jadefire Teachings was buffed up to 160%, Rushing Wind's kick damage was increased by 150%, and Rushing Winds now increases Renewing Mist healing by 100% up from 50%. Yulon's Whisper healing has been increased by 400%, and Jade Bond was nerfed down to 20% from 60%. It looks more buffs than nerfs overall though, so happy days for the Mistweaver Monks. Now Paladins have a couple of quick changes for Holy, mainly to mana costs. Beacon of Virtue will cost 5% base mana up from 4, and Holy Shock will cost 2.8% base mana up from 2.6, so you're going to be spending more mana. That's it for the Paladins so far this week, I'm afraid. priests have a handful of changes as well. For discipline, Power Word Radiance healing has been increased by 20%, Flash Heal will be getting a 15% buff, Premonition of Piety increases healing done by 20% up from 15%, and then Preemptive Care increases atonement duration by 4 seconds up from 3. All in all, some nice buffs for Disc moving forward. And then Shadow has a quick buff to their Psychic Link. Direct damage will now splash 30% to targets with Vampiric Touch, up from 25%. I kind of feel like Psychic Link has changed almost every patch at this rate, yo-yoing back and forth, getting nerfed and buffed and nerfed again. Hopefully it stays up at 30% for a bit longer this time. Now, rogues did make the list as well, but it's only one change, and it is a nerf for assassination, I'm afraid. Master Assassin crit strike chance was reduced down to 20% from 25%. That's all for now for the rogues. Now, one class that had a bunch of updates going into 11.05 was Shaman, and I guess they were doing a bit too well because they're going to see a whole bunch of nerfs. To start with though, Farseer is getting a bit of a boost. Ancestor Chain Lightning damage, Lava Burst damage, and Elemental Blast damage are all being increased, but then Stormbringer Arc Discharge will only grant one instant cast of Chain Lightning or Lightning Bolt, Voltaic Surge bonus damage was reduced from 15% down to 5%, Echo Chamber damage bonus was cut in half down to 20%, Ascendance now increases the damage of elemental overloads by 100% down from 150%, Preeminence increases haste during Ascendance by 20% down from 25%, so some big nerfs for Ascendance right there. Ice Fury did see a buff though, Frost Shock damage will be increased up to 200% from 150%. Enhancement didn't escape unscathed, Lightning Bolt damage has been taken down by 10%, Chain Lightning will see a 10% nerf too, and then Stormbringer Tempest is getting knocked down by 15% as well. So not looking too great for the DPS Shamans right now. And then Restoration Shaman will see the same buffs to Farseer's Chain Lightning and Lava Burst damage. Next up are the Warlocks, who also have a whole bunch of changes, but this time it is buffs. For Affliction, Hellcaller's Wither damage has been increased by 25%, Agony damage is up 15%, Corruption damage will see a 25% buff, and Unstable Affliction has been increased by 20%. So some very nice buffs to get those damage over time effects pumping just a bit more. For Demonology, Dreadstalkers now have a 100% chance to generate a Demonic Core, Grimoire Felgar damage is being buffed up by 125% up from 60%, Hand of Gul'dan damage is up 25%, and Cold Dreadstalkers will see a 20% buff too, so some very nice buffs for Demonology as well. And then Destruction wasn't left out either, they'll see the same 25% buff to Wither, Chaos Bolt damage will see a 10% buff, Immolate damage is up 25%, Incinerate damage is getting a 20% buff, Conflagrate damage is also up 25%, and Rain of Fire damage has been increased by 20%. So every single Warlock spec is getting some nice damage boosts as we head into next week. And then we finally come to the Warriors. Execute damage will see a 10% buff for all specs. For arms specifically, Colossus Demolish single target damage is being buffed up by 15%, Slayer Reap the Storm damage is up 25%, Slayer's Strike damage is up 15%, Mortal Strike is getting a 15% buff too, Overpower will see the same 15% increase, and Dreadnought is buffed up by 15% as well. On top of all of that, Cleave will also see a 20% damage boost, so lots of nice buffs for arms warriors this week. For Fury, Slayer Reap the Storm is being buffed up by 25%, Slayer Strike is up 15%, Mountain Thane's Lightning Strike damage will see a 30% buff, Bloodthirst damage is up 20%, Bloodbath damage is up 20%, and then Rampage damage will see a 10% buff as well. And then Protection will also see the Colossus Demolish single target damage increase too. Now, all of these adjustments are scheduled to go live with the next weekly reset, which is October 30th for NA Realms, so you won't have too much longer to wait if you feel like your class isn't performing too well so far in the patch. It's not just class changes that are happening though, there have also been a whole bunch of nerfs for the Blackrock Depths raid. Every single boss should be much easier with these changes in place. Certain mechanics won't be cast as often, various abilities have had their damage reduced, a lot of bosses and adds in fights have had their health reduced quite significantly in some cases, so the fights should be quite a bit shorter as well. In some cases, every single ability of a boss fight has been nerfed. I was surprised surprised to see the raid tuned so high, especially for normal mode specifically, which should really have been quite easy to progress through for most players. With this being a part of the 20th anniversary event, it should have been a bit easier, in my opinion, to let more players hop in and get some raid experience. Now, most of these changes are aimed at LFR and normal mode, so Heroic will still pose a larger challenge, though I would expect Heroic to see some nerfs next week if the raid remains to be a bit too much of a challenge. So if you tried to jump into LFR or normal Blackrock Depths and found it to be a bit too difficult, every boss should be quite a bit easier with these hotfixes in place. Now, in other news, I know patch 11.05 and WoW's 20th anniversary just and so started, but it looks like we will be very quickly moving on to our next round of updates. One of the PTR branches was just updated to 11.07, which means we will likely see the first PTR build for that patch within the next couple of weeks. We don't know too much about this patch, so it will be very exciting to see where we're heading next and how this all leads into patch 11.1. Throughout Dragonflight, the 0.7 patches introduced the next storyline and built up the next chapter of the expansion, and it should provide us with a bunch of new content to sink our teeth into. That's not all though. Patch 11.1 also appeared on the internal testing servers, which means the dev team are moving on to testing the next major content patch themselves, and we will probably see that hit PTR in about 2 months, which lines up well with the start of the new year. That should also line up with the release of 11.07, so I would expect that to go live sometime after the holidays, and we'll be moving into a whole new year of WoW content. Now, something else that happened this week is something I honestly never thought would happen. Blizzard released a new store mount, but it's not just any old store mount, it's a Brutosaur, complete with auction house. The Traders Gilded Brutosaur is the second mount we've seen in the game that has an auction house on it, but this time, instead of a vendor on the other side, it will also have a mailbox. That makes it arguably more useful than the 5 million gold Brutosaur that was introduced in BFA. Now, usually when a store mount comes out, you'd expect it to be anywhere from 15 to 30 bucks. That seems to be the typical range for these things, but the Brutosaur blows that all out of the water, clocking in at $90. That's the same as the highest tiers of new expansions, or an expansion and several months of game time. A $90 store mount was definitely not on my bingo card for the future of WoW, but here we are. Curiously, if you bought WoW tokens and used those to get Battle.net balance, you would need 6 tokens, which would cost you about 1.5 million gold right now, which is actually much cheaper than the BFA Brutosaur was, and you get a mailbox, so the mount is arguably a pretty good deal if you use gold to purchase it, at least when compared to the Brutosaur. What absolutely blows my mind about this mount is how many people I've seen riding around on it. Walking through Dornegal, there are so many of these things just chilling around. You never have to run to the auction house ever again or find a mailbox. These mounts just do it for you. I've even seen pictures floating around of little standoffs between the 5 million gold Brutosaurs and the new $90 Brutosaurs. It's actually kind of hilarious, but almost everyone in my guild who wasn't able to pick up the Brutosaur in BFA has been rushing to pick up this mount, either through tokens and gold or just by forking over $90. I guess having an auction house mount is just too useful for so many players. Now, whether you think store mounts should be a thing or whether a $90 price tag is ridiculous, you cannot deny that this mount has made Blizzard a lot of money. The precedent of a $90 mount really does worry me though. This time it's an auction house and a mailbox, something we haven't ever seen in-game. That kinda trumped a 5 million gold price tag mount that players were working towards for months, stressing and stretching themselves to reach 5 million gold before the mount was removed. What's next? A mount that lets you teleport or portal to every destination in the capital city portal hub? A mount with a bank, auction house, mailbox and a vendor all at once in one place? Where can they go from here? And how much will the next big store mount cost? I guess we'll just have to wait and see, but how do you feel about a $90 Brutosaur mount making it into the store, and do you think it's actually a good deal in any circumstance? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about in this video is a brand new Twitch drop. You can grab yourself the Sand Scarab pet by watching 4 hours of WoW streams between October 22nd and November 5th, so plenty of time to get your 4 hours in to secure a brand new pet. But that's all of the WoW news we have this week, so that's it for this video. What do you think of the huge wave of class buffs and nerfs? Are there any classes or specs that you still think need a lot of attention? And how do you feel about the Blackrock Depths nerfs and how difficult the raid has been so far? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and to all of our members here on YouTube. You can see the names floating by on screen. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can find links in the description or click the join button just below the video. If you enjoyed the video or found it useful in any way, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you're always kept up to date. Thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.